Go. Hi, everyone. My name is Chloe Smith-Frank, and I'm a senior at Germantown Friends School in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I've wanted to take GOA's Climate Change and Global Inequality course because I want to study global affairs and diplomacy in college, and climate change negotiations are an increasingly important part of that. Um, so I'm excited to share some of what I've learned with you while you take this Flex course. Today, I will be conducting an interview with Cynthia Elliott about just transitions. Ms. Elliott holds an MA in Global Environmental Policy from American University and a BA in Environmental Science and Policy from the University of Southern Maine. She is a Fukushima Global Ambassador, and in 2012, she was selected as an Energy and Environment Fellow with the Japan Foundation. She also has experience working on urban stormwater policy and sustainability, energy efficiency, and clean energy policy. Ms. Elliott is currently an associate for the Global Climate Program of the World Resources Institute, which is a global nonprofit research organization. She focuses on transparency and implementation of climate change mitigation actions and building capacity in developing countries to effectively track emissions reductions. So thank you so much for joining me, Ms. Elliott. I'd just like to start by asking you to explain what you define as a just transition.
Sure, happy to answer your questions. Happy to be here. So a just transition is basically the approach that one might take to think a little bit forward-looking about the activities, climate change activities in terms of climate change policies and actions and how they impact various employment situations in different sectors. So, for example, the energy sector, how you would prepare for those activities and ideally prevent any negative impacts such as job loss or other social impacts. So it's basically taking sort of a forward-looking approach when you're undertaking climate policies and actions and thinking about both the negative externalities and how you manage those.
So currently, who would be most negatively affected by a transition to a low-carbon economy?
So I suppose that depends on your understanding of what sort of a negative impact would be. In general, I think everyone could potentially be impacted by such a major transition towards a low-carbon economy. Everyone's going to have to change our behavior, how we interact, how we travel, how we get to and from work, so things like that. But in terms of who's really going to be most negatively impacted in terms of sort of the employment situation, definitely those working in the energy sector, particularly the fossil fuel economy. That could be within, government employees. That can also be private sector employees, and really those that are taking substantial activities in coal and natural gas and things of that nature, as we'll have to transition away from those fossil fuels over the next 20 years.
So where do you currently see the most effective just transitions being implemented in terms of transitioning workers to new industries without a lot of job loss?
So it's, in some senses, it's a little bit of a new concept. So there's a growing movement among national governments and fossil fuel energy unions, so labor unions, to try and tackle some of the potential negative impacts from climate change policy. And so what we've been seeing is specifically within national governments, those that are starting to look at longer term transitions. I mean, you have to be able to predict what the impacts are going to be. So you have to think a little bit beyond the typical 5-year national planning cycle and look a little bit longer term. What are really going to be significant impacts over the long term? And a number of national governments are undertaking efforts to develop long-term low-emission development strategies. And through this process, They are working together in collaboration with corporations, with energy companies, with utilities, with labor unions to really unpack what the potential negative impacts will be and work on solutions to address those. So for example, in Canada, they have made a plan to end coal, the use of coal by 2030. A number of other countries, Germany, Spain, others are also making such plans to phase out use of coal. And through that exercise, through the planning phase that Canada undertook, they had a very dramatic and broad nationwide stakeholder dialogue with corporations, with the energy sector to really understand what the impacts would be and develop plans and investment opportunities to address potential job loss and help transition employees from the current sector where they're working into new clean energy jobs. And so I think they had over like $29 billion in investment planned during the transition period for about 10 years to really help both the communities, the companies, the individual workers transition from coal.
And is anything like that currently being discussed or implemented in the US?
No, in short, no. So we don't have the same degree of national dialogue that some of these other countries have undertaken. It's really a massive undertaking to bring these diverse stakeholders together to have a common conversation about that. And so we're a bit further behind, I think, in comparison to some other countries. However, we do have some instances of the beginnings of a dialogue. So we have there was a recently announced legislation for a Green New Deal in the United States, which would look at opportunities and ways to actually mobilize an equitable transition to net zero greenhouse gas emissions in the US. I think we're a bit far off from that becoming a reality at the moment, but it is a step forward. It's the first steps towards a national dialogue. Okay. I think the important critical factor, the very first step of a just transition process is to really make sure that those stakeholders that will be most negatively impacted are part of the conversation, and really opening up that dialogue is critical. So it's good to see that, signs such as the Green New Deal sort of coming out, but I think we're still a bit far off in the US.
So 2 questions based off of that. Have you noticed anything in the Green New Deal that you think is either particularly effective and, a good step forward, or anything that you would change based on your work?
So I don't work specifically in the US. I work more at the international level, so I'm more familiar, I think, with some of the cases going on in Germany and France and Spain. In terms of the US, that's a really tough one. I mean, for us, this is a question about this issue of dialogue. I mean, how would you, if I could flip that question back to you, what would be some of your ideas or thoughts on really triggering a national dialogue at that scale?
Yeah, I think it's not the best sort of optimism I feel usually works best, but I think in this case, people, not just politicians, but also corporations, and I think educators too, have to be really upfront all the time about how urgent this issue is and how, we can't wait any longer to address it. And I think when I have heard that, it's sort of, oh, we have to do this now, but there aren't really concrete explanations as to why. And so I think we have to get a lot better at conveying what catastrophic climate change will actually do to people's day-to-day lives. So, I was talking to my teacher and she said, yeah, last year I couldn't drive to school for 2 days because it was flooded. But, imagine if that was more frequent, or the floods that are happening in the Midwest, I feel like we've just been sort of silent about it, but that will continue to happen more and more frequently. So I don't want to say sort of worst case scenario, but I think being more clear about the urgency of this issue and the consequences if we don't make changes are really the only way at this point.
Yeah, that's a good point. We certainly don't cover the issue, both in terms of national news and sort of how information is shared within the school system, within certain media channels. So you're right. I think, there are probably ways to bring the message out a little bit stronger, and perhaps, well, I think the point is, really to connect individuals to the impacts that they're experiencing, because experiences are, nationwide. There's droughts, there's fires, there's flooding, Florida's just experienced some unusual activity outside the typical hurricane season. So like connecting people to those and talking more about how climate trends are changing as a result of the impact. Yep, that's probably a good suggestion.
Thank you. So I had a question about, you mentioned you've been working in France and Germany and Spain. I'm wondering, since sort of parallel to this conversation, there's a discussion about how many jobs are becoming automated. How do we square sort of transitioning people into an industry where the jobs they're taking now might be done by robots in 15 years?
That is a fascinating question. I do not know quite enough about the shift towards automated jobs and what that really means in terms of sort of the broader impact. I'm trying to figure out precisely how that links to climate change and the just transition shifting. I mean, if you think about sort of the typical coal miner or someone working in the coal industry and the retraining and, shifting them toward more of a clean energy type position, whether it's related to solar panel manufacture and distribution or wind turbines, et cetera. I still feel like there's a lot of that work that does require hands-on effort, but I am not nearly knowledgeable enough on the issue of shifting from mechanical human activity toward robotics.
So then in those same countries again, what do you think it is about France, Germany, and Spain that has enabled those governments to really make this push now?
So the sort of unique situation with the US compared to other countries is basically the state of national dialogue on climate change. The US is very unique in the sense that we are still debating what is the scientific fact in this country. Poland, France, Germany, Spain, these are all countries that rely heavily on fossil fuels. And, the Conference of the Parties was recently held in Poland, in Katowice, which is coal mining country of Poland. You talk to the coal miners there and everyone understands climate change is a reality. They understand that it's a reality. This is where we are. This is something we need to address. And it's a different conversation. It's not, the pushback you get is generally geared toward, well, we still want to make sure that we have jobs and careers and our community, our social structures are built around, the coal industry. And shifting is a huge ask. Asking people to uproot their lives and their livelihoods and change their way of life. It's a huge ask. But that doesn't mean they're not willing to listen and come to the table and have a conversation about that, and find a solution so that over the next 20, 30 years, they can transition. So while it's a big issue in many of these countries, it's not an easy solution. There's still hot debate. For example, in Germany, the date they agreed on, I don't remember which year it was. It might be like 2020. I can't remember. It wasn't soon enough for the environmentalists in Germany, and it wasn't. It was too fast for the energy unions, for the labor unions. So there's still going to be some disagreement, but the fact that you have everyone at the table trying to find a solution, it's very different than what we see in the US, where we're still, arguing that it's not really a reality or isn't going to impact us in the US the same way it's impacting other countries. And so I think this initial step of really opening the dialogue, making sure our media and our education system is really pulling this information out for people so that it is at the fore and we can actually take a first step toward those conversations. That's something that we need to do here that other countries are already doing.
So I had a question about the re-education portion of a just transition. In the countries you just mentioned, Western European countries, higher education is a lot cheaper than it is in the United States. And I'm wondering how you think a proposal to provide free education to some people, fossil fuel workers, while still keeping it relatively unaffordable for other Americans, how you think that would go over and how you think that can be addressed to make sure that it does happen.
That's a very, very interesting question. And I think it's about, the devil's in the details. It's really how you package these policies, these support policies, and talk a little bit about what you're trying to accomplish. So in terms of retraining, I think that it's definitely something that can be tailored to specific industry groups such as fossil fuel workers, while still perhaps providing some form of benefit for others as well. So an example I could give you is in Singapore. Singapore is very small geographically. They don't have tremendous natural resources, yet they are one of the fastest developing countries in the world, and they're now a part of the global superpowers of the world, especially in terms of the financial sector. And one of the things that they had recognized during their transition was the value of human resources in the country. Mm-hmm. And what they ended up doing was they created a national program where anyone could participate in a free retraining and education program. So if you had a job of 10 years and you were building a career and one day you decided this isn't how I want to spend my life, I'm not enjoying this, you could enter a program and take 2 years and in terms of an education course. It's completely sponsored by the government, gives folks the freedom to choose sort of the activities that they want to do, but it's a self-driven transitional opportunity where anyone can actually change their situation. And so I think there's I'm not sure that that's necessarily the right situation for the US, mm-hmm. considering we're very, very different, but I think there are probably ways that we could tailor those kinds of policies so that they allow for certain communities to transition and at the same time provide opportunities for others who are not perhaps benefiting from those retrainings.
Mm-hmm. What do you think needs to change in the US besides acknowledging that climate change exists. Once we do that, what do you think the next step is to sort of get this ball rolling as quickly as possible?
Well, we're pretty slow on a number of facets. We're slow in terms of broader national policy, adopting carbon taxation schemes or carbon trading schemes. We're also a bit slow in terms of individual action and really getting the message out on what individuals can be doing. I think infrastructure is going to be a huge piece of our transition. We need to transition the building sector from current state of development towards, zero energy buildings by, I think it's like by 2020, we need to have all new buildings. Zero energy, that's just unbelievable if you talk to any property manager or, building developer these days. And so we need some massive shifts in how cities are built, how we transport people to and from, and developing infrastructure that's going to support individual lifestyle change. So you're in Philadelphia. I don't know if you're downtown or if you're outside the city, but the opportunities for most Americans to ride their bicycles through the city is not where we need it to be. Mm-hmm. And really figuring out those infrastructure changes so that we can, make the lifestyle choices so that we can transition. It's going to be a big shift, but that's sort of where I see one of the main focus areas.
Do you think that that timeline is at all realistic?
Well, so there are some things that we will definitely, I'm speaking just from my personal view. There are some targets that I think will overshoot, and we'll have to adjust for maybe later on. But there are some things that I think are still within our grasp. There are massive lifestyle changes, I think, that can be made at any time by everyone. And it's just a matter of mindset and communication and making those just making the situation so that people feel the pressure or the need to change. Greta, this Swedish girl who's like out there sending all these messages. In Sweden now, it's like a social stigma to take an airplane anywhere. And the Swedish airlines are now coming up with plans to offset their emissions from transporting Swedish passengers. And that's just, within the span of a few months. So I think there are things that we can't predict that will, that are possible, but there are other things that are going to be difficult, very difficult.
And then finally, I was wondering, do you have any suggestions for organizations or online resources that people can go to if they want to learn more about economic transitions or just climate change in general?
Sure. So the few things that just pop into my head. One is the New Climate Economy. This is a huge commission that a number of WRI is a part of the commission, and we produce a series of research reports that really analyzes the economics of transitioning to a low carbon future. And what that means. And they have some pretty impressive studies that they've undertaken in terms of really what are the benefits of making these monumental shifts. So New Climate Economy is definitely one of them. If there are folks that are very interested in the concept of just transition and support for workers in the fossil fuel industry, the Just Transition Center is another good source of information to reach out to. For those that are really interested in what the transition means for companies, corporations, and businesses, BSR Business for Social Responsibility is a really excellent source I could suggest. And then maybe that's it off the top of my head.
Okay. Well, I should let you go, but thank you so much for your time and everything you shared with us. This was really great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for the